Hi everyone, this video by Dentacme will cover all the steps of all ceramic crown preparation on tooth number 8. So before we proceed further, we need to understand various criteria which will be following for this all ceramic crown prep on this tooth number 8. This is a Kilgore tooth. We have taken the image of the Kilgore, and the criteria which we are following is the standard criteria which are followed in USA bench exams, right? So this is how we'll be doing the reduction. That is how the ultimate tooth will look like. Okay, so that is what we are trying to make here. We're giving our best to keep it neat and clear for you. So this is a shoulder margin which we are looking for. Then the supragingival height of the shoulder margin has to be 0.5 mm on all around. I mean, it's like all around throughout the crown. It has to be 0.5 mm supragingival height. Target for this at least 0.6, not less than 0.5. Then, as I said, this has to be done all around. So this margin is like a 3D picture. So the whole margin has to be 0.5 mm supragingival. That is very important, very critical criteria. Then what incisor reduction will do? Will be targeting around between 1.5 to 2 mm. That is a target for incisor reduction, more towards 2 mm. That is what we'll try to achieve with this crown prep. Then what is the width of the margin, the shoulder margin which we'll be making? It has to be minimum 1 mm. It cannot be less than 1 mm, because less than 1 mm will not have strength. Okay, so just make sure when you create this shoulder margin, it has to be minimum 1 mm. You can go up to 1.2 mm, but minimum 1 mm is our target with this shoulder margin. Okay, you can see the flat shoulder margin. Width is 1 mm. I am repeating. Many students keep flat but keep margin lower than or lesser than 1 mm. That is not acceptable. Then on the labial surface, as we move from shoulder margin towards the incisal edge, the width of the margin, the width of the reduction of the labial surface, it just keep on increasing from shoulder 1 mm to 1.2 to 1.3 in the almost in the middle, then around 1.4 towards the incisal edge, or you can say towards the incisal third, and it goes up to 1.5 to 2 in the incisal reduction. Lingual fossa reduction has to be 1 mm. Usually it is around 0.8 to 1 mm, but try to keep it around 1 mm so that we get good clearance from the lower incisor. So that is the target with this. Then if you notice here, right, I'll just highlight it with a different color. Just a second. Yeah, so if you notice here, this wall, this is the axial wall on the lingual surface, and this is going to give retention for the crown from the lingual surface. Rest all is lingual fossa, that is concave, will not give any retention. So this axial wall give retention. So this at least has to be 1 mm. Then on to the next. Okay. On to the next surface. Then on to the labial surface. If we look from the labial side, that is how the crown will be reduced. So it should have a good taper. Tapers around 6 to 10 degrees. That is the target. Can go up to 12 degrees. That's okay. Acceptable. So that is the taper we want. And again, you can see there is shoulder margin here. So again here, the supragingival height is around 0.5 mm as we discussed before, but now from a different angle. From all sides, right? From all sides means 3D. Then the width of the margin, shoulder minimum, you know now, as 1 mm. Minimum 1 mm, can be 1.2 also, it's okay. Then incisor reduction again between 1.5 to 2 mm. That's all we have discussed, just a different angle to visualize. Okay, so that's it. So that is the criteria will be following. So the first step is incisor reduction. You can use any burr for this step, but we are doing it with 847-014. Just an advice before we proceed further for various steps, you must know the diameters of the burrs you are using. That is the only way you will come to know how much reduction you have done. That's very important. So let's just get started with it. So here we are giving initial depth cut with almost from the base of the burr, if you notice. intention is to give around 1.5 mm of the depth cut. Okay, and that will check with the probe, as you can see here. So probe will give us that idea. So ultimately we'll give 3 depth cuts, and our incisor reduction will be between 1.5 to 2 mm. Okay, so we are giving here right now around 1.5 mm, and will reach to 2 mm when we'll be doing the finishing of the incisor edge. Then we'll merge whatever is left in between the depth cuts and make this incisor edge really smooth. Of course, taking care very carefully, slowly, so that we do not create further ditches on the incisor edge. So once it is properly smoothened, right, we'll again check with the probe. It is around 1.5 mm and gives a very good devil horn look appearance, right? Now before I proceed to labial reduction, we need to understand why I left these 2 corners of the incisor edge. It just give me 2 ideas. One, I know how much reduction I have done. I can check it again with the probe. So it is around 1.5 mm. Plus it is also making sure that I am not touching the adjacent teeth incisor edges, because adjacent teeth injury is a serious issue with your bench exams. Anyways, for in general also we should not be touching the adjacent teeth, but your bench exams it is like criminal. Okay, so it just makes sure that we are not touching the adjacent tooth. That's why we preserve these 2 horns or corners of this incisor edge. Let's just start with the labial reduction. So before proceeding with labial reduction, we need to understand that incisor labial surface is biplanar. One plane is called primary plane, right? And that primary plane is towards the cervical 1/3 or you can say half of the tooth surface. Now it is primary because we'll be making margins over here, and that's very crucial for any crown prep. And margin for all ceramic crown is shoulder with rounded internal line angles, right? So for the best burr which I found for this margin preparation is 847-014. Okay, so tip diameter of this burr is around 0.9 mm, and that is kind of perfect, okay, for making this initial margin. Ultimately I'll reach up to, my intention, my target is to reach up to between 1 to 1.2 mm, and that I'll get with the red burr of 847-016, which has a tip diameter of around 1.1. So the angle which we need to keep for this primary plane, as you can see in the image, is very important. If we overdo it, right, if we do not keep this burr parallel to the primary plane, either we'll ditch the margin or will not get the proper width of the margin. Okay, so that's why this angle is very important. You can note down this, save this image so that you get the right angle for this. So whenever you give depth cuts, just make sure your burr is in line with the long axis of the tooth. That's very important. And plus, a very common mistake, you should be using your burr and move your burr in up and down motion, right? It should never be pressing on the tooth surface, because it is a plastic tooth and we are not using water. So it just burns out the plastic surface with the heat of the motion of the burr, and with that burr efficiency also reduces with time. Okay, so just make sure when you give depth cut, use this motion, and your depth cut should be full depth of the tip. Okay, so that you know how much reduction you have done. That's again very important. Next again is a very common mistake. When you're about to give your second depth cut, make sure your burr moves along the contour of gingiva. It should not go straight, because when it goes straight, your supragingival height is less in the proximal areas and it is kind of perfect in the labial front surface. Okay, so that is a very common mistake. Try not to do it. So this way, give depth cuts on both the sides, right? So do not repeat the mistake we discussed before, and your depth cuts again will be full depth of the tip. So once we are done with the primary plane depth cuts, now we'll start with secondary plane depth cuts, and angulation will be little different here. As you can see here in this image, right, your secondary plane angle of the burr is different from primary plane to maintain the original curvature of the incisor labial surface. Okay, so this is again very important. It will give a proper depth and will give a very good shape on the labial surface. So this way we'll give 2 depth cuts on the secondary plane of this incisor, depth cuts. We'll start reducing whatever is left in between these depth cuts and make sure you follow contour of gingiva while doing so. It has to be done very carefully. This is the most important part of your preparation, your margin. Now you are making your shoulder margin with this work. Has to be done very carefully, has to be done very smoothly, not in hurry, right? Just make sure you give full focus at this stage of your crown prep. Just keep merging, keep following the contour of gingiva. Remove everything which is present in between the depth cuts. Make it a plain surface, right? So that you are ready to move on to the next step confidently. Similar way, just do it on the secondary plane also. Remove whatever is left in between the depth cuts. But while doing so, just make sure there is always a little junctional area between primary and secondary plane which is little higher, and that gives an undercut kind of appearance to the crown. So make sure you just merge that also while doing secondary plane. That is a very common thing which happens with the student. So just merge it and finish the whole surface, smooth it, make sure it is nicely done. Now next is proximal reduction, and this is the most crucial step in crown prep because this is where we have maximum chances of injuring the adjacent tooth. So this has to be done very carefully. So one mistake can be we can injure the adjacent tooth. Second mistake, to prevent, or because in our mind we have a thought that we should not injure the adjacent tooth, we keep burr little away from the adjacent tooth and we overcut the tooth we are preparing and makes the margin wide. Second, we may not take care of the burr tip and tip may go very close to gingiva, making supragingival height of the margin very low, or it can be more towards the equigingival. Okay, so these are the few things we need to take care. They or 2-3 thoughts at one time, staying away from the adjacent tooth, making sure that a margin is around 0.5 to 0.6 mm supragingival, right? So, and our taper is also not altered. We need a good taper. 6 to 10 degrees taper is what we want. All these things, all these thoughts together in one step we have to take care. Let's just see how to do it. So the burr which we are using here is 859. So 859, well, if you get as a very good burr, right? So it is a long needle burr usually used for anterior teeth, and this burr has to be used in a way that tip is almost in the cervical embrasure, just close to the point where we want to break the contact, making sure that we don't touch the adjacent tooth. And this tip, as you can see here, it should be used in up and down motion. It should not be pressed on the tooth surface. Using up and down motion and giving little lingual pressure. So going straight out from the lingual side, making sure that we break the contact and our taper is also maintained. Same way we'll do it on the other side. The nick you are seeing here is not by the burr. It is basically the class 3 cavity on tooth number 9, mesolingual class 3 cavity. So that is why you are kind of seeing this depression. So otherwise you have not touched the adjacent tooth. So the next now will be finishing the whole labial margin from mesial to distal with 847 14 burr again. So making sure that the margin is flat, it is shoulder, and we are finishing along with this, finishing the margin, smoothing it, trying to do it as best as possible to keep it uniform in width and in supragingival height. That is the whole purpose of using this burr right now. And then we'll be using the 847 16 or 18 red burr for ultimate smoothing of it. Then in the end we'll be using 847 16 red burr to finish the margin, to finish the labial surface, make the margin smooth, distinct, uniform, width wise, height wise. Supragingival height also is taken care of this by this burr. And once we're done with this, then we'll shift on to the lingual side. The next is lingual surface, and this has to be done very carefully because there are high chances, many times students get this margin on the lingual side wider than normal, more than 1 mm, and it's not their fault. It has to be done in indirect vision, and that needs time, that needs eye trailing, that needs hand-eye coordination, and that comes with practice only. So once you get practice of it, there should not be any problem while preparing for this lingual margin and lingual surface. Before we proceed, it is very important to keep our burr in the cingulum area to prepare our axial wall parallel to the labial surface. That angle has to be correct. We cannot over taper this wall, and we cannot of course leave undercut here, because that is only 1 to 1.5 mm of the axial wall of the cingulum, which will give retention from the lingual side, and it has to be maintained. Okay, so that is why this angle is very important. Right, so here on the lingual surface I am giving a small little depth cut right in the center of the lingual surface of the cingulum with 847/16 red burr, directly using the red burr, and I am giving that depth cut of about half of the diameter of the burr. Okay, and that is very crucial, because if you give full depth right now, then while finishing the whole lingual surface, the margin gets widened in this particular area. Okay, so this is very critical and a very technical practical steps which you should follow. Then you start preparing the margin for the lingual surface in one half first, and then you continue that on the other half of the tooth surface, and ultimately you merge this whole surface and run this burr in full flow, right, from mesial to distal or distal to mesial, whatever is convenient to you, with this same burr. Okay, keeping in mind that we have to keep the width of around 1 mm on lingual surface, and supragingival height has to be around 0.5 to 0.6 mm, not more than, not less than this. So that is the whole target, that is the whole thing we are keeping in mind. We are also making sure that our burr angle is parallel to long axis of the tooth. We are not over tapering the axial wall we are creating on the cingulum. The height, minimum height for the axial wall on the cingulum, especially in the Kilgore, is around 1 to 1.5 mm. The next is the reduction of lingual fossa, which is the last step of this tooth preparation, and that is done with 379023 burr, which is a flame shaped burr, and it has a convexity, and lingual fossa has a concavity. Both should fit in, and that is the angle we have to follow, and reduction has to be around 1 mm on this lingual fossa, right? So let's just continue with this step now. So here we are moving this burr in mesodistal direction, with convexity of the burr creating the concavity on the lingual fossa, maintaining that concavity on the lingual fossa in fact, and the reduction we are doing is around 1 mm. And if you notice, when I am moving towards the cingulum, I am just turning this burr backwards, so that I do not reduce the height of the axial wall in the cingulum area. So that's again very crucial, very important step, because that's a very common mistake. Usually the height of the axial wall, it gets reduced during this step only. Then whatever we are left with, that is the marginal ridges, we need to round them off properly, and their reduction also has to be around 0.8 to 1 mm to give a uniform smooth reduction to this lingual fossa surface. Now in the end, before we submit this tooth, or we think it is final, we need to round off all the line angles, point angles, incisal edge and point angles should be rounded. Incisal edge has to be straightened with the burr before we submit. So it has to be aesthetically looking good crown prep, right? I always believe aesthetics is again a very important, crucial part of your tooth prep, along with all the criteria we need to follow. That's it. All the very best. Keep practicing hard.